With the 2025 NHL season over, now attention pivots to the offseason, where the Edmonton Oilers, who have come up just short 2 years in a row, have a whole lot of questions and decisions to make about who's going to be on the team next year on today's edition of Locked On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. Just wrapped up my second Stanley Cup Finals run as host of Locked On Oilers. Fun fact, the 2 years I have been host of Locked On Oilers, the Oilers have made the Stanley Cup Final, so we'll see if we can keep that going for a third straight year next year. I do want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we've got your team covered every day. And on today's very busy Edmonton Oilers offseason deep dive episode of Locked On Oilers, there is so much to get to. We are going to start by talking about who is under contract who is under contract for next year, who will probably be on the team next year, who's a candidate for cost-cutting trade, who's a candidate for a change of scenery trade. Our second segment, we will pivot to the pending unrestricted free agents, who's going to leave, why they're likely to leave, if any of them are likely to stay. And then in our final segment, we'll tie a bow on today's show, going in a little bit deeper into some of the questions we had asked towards the end of last week as far as who gets paid what the big priorities are. So to set the table here for you, the NHL salary cap is a punitive measure. It is a tool the NHL owners forced upon the players about 20 years ago. We are not that far into the salary cap era of the NHL, but for much of the past 20 years, NHL salaries have lagged behind the other major sports. Now, there are a litany of factors, television deal rights being the big driving difference for why the NFL and NBA make so much more money in the aggregate than the NHL, whereas the NHL is still a gate-dependent league, meaning tickets are what drives the biggest portion of league revenue. So it is important that its teams are competitive and there is a bit of balance so more fan bases are activated. But at large, the salary cap is a means of punishing good teams. That if you're a good team year after year, you eventually don't get to keep your guys. And we have seen this over and over again over the years. Teams that win Stanley Cups go to Stanley Cup Finals. Eventually they get broken up. Sometimes it's because the GM, the stakeholders of the team feel they need to change up the energy. They need to change up the style of play. Maybe they change the coach and they need players who are more adaptable to that coach's preferred style. And then the other side of it is guys get squeezed out. You look at how teams cope with brain drain, for lack of a better word. You know, we generally talk about that as far as education base, financial base in cities and smaller towns. But that's what happens to these teams when they consistently win. And Tampa Bay is the most obvious example of this. You know, Alex Killorn, Pat Maroon, Andre Palat, Barclay Goodrow, Blake Coleman, Yanni Gourde, all guys who eventually, Mikhail Sergachev, Ryan McDonough, you know, they traded McDonough and brought him back. So that's a funny one. But you eventually have to pay your bills. And the punishment, of course, of being a good team is you don't get to keep everyone. And that's really the first framing point for this conversation on today's show. The Oilers have to pay Connor McDavid starting after next season. He needs a new contract after next season. The 25-26 one is when that new contract would go into effect. He can agree to that contract this summer. Evan Bouchard, he is a restricted free agent this year. He is someone who needs to be dealt with. Because of that, you need to make decisions about the rest of your roster. So if we're going to pay 14 for Draisaitl, 15 for McDavid, and like 11 for Bouchard, and that's going to put us at over $40 million for three players. What does that mean we have for everybody else? You know, if we have $41 million tied up in Draisaitl, McDavid, and Bouchard, and we can have $58 million for the rest of the team, how do we fill out 15 spots and two goalies with 52 to 57, depending on, you know, we're not talking in absolutes here because we don't know what McDavid and Bouchard's numbers are going to be for. But at the same time, that needs to be your point of reference, your framing device, if you will, for the money you can afford. So with that in mind, I'm going to click over to my notes here because it will help me stay organized. So of players who are under contract for next year, that will be back 100%. Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, Zach Hyman, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Darnell Nurse, Matthias Ekholm, Jake Wallman. All of those guys will be on the team next year, barring something unforeseen. And I said it on Friday, I believe. I wouldn't be shocked. Like, it's not out of the realm of possibility they try and get cheaper and younger in that Ekholm spot and try and turn him into a younger player. But I think if you're a team that's on the precipice of being Stanley Cup contender good, you're probably not replacing a first pair left-handed defenseman in one offseason. That probably requires a little bit of trial and error of trying to find a better complement for Bouchard. And Ekholm at his best is a great complement. He's such a strong puck retriever, really solid at getting the puck to Bouchard so he can work his magic moving the puck. The next tier of guys are players under contract for next year who are candidates to get cost cut moved. Number one, Evander Kane. It was purported during the season last year that should he have been healthy prior to the trade deadline, they would have liked to have moved him at the deadline. It's been reported over the last week or two that the Oilers would probably like to move Evander Kane to get cheaper. I think with his limited no trade protection, I believe it's 16 teams, he can accept the trade to half the league. And his number isn't unreasonable for 1 year for what he's going to bring should he be healthy. Evander Kane should put up 20 to 25 goals and play with a bit of an edge. And teams love those toolboxes. There are plenty of teams in the NHL who could talk themselves into 1 year of Evander Kane. Hell, if the Oilers really need to, they can even retain some salary to make that more enticing. Other than Evander Kane, we can talk about Victor Arvidsson and we can talk about Adam Henrique. And Arvidsson, I understand his frustration. It's been reported over the last few days. He was frustrated that he was a healthy scratch at points in the playoffs. He felt he never really got what he was looking for as far as opportunity as an Oiler when he had signed here last summer. And then Adam Henrique is someone who I think is just overpaid for what he is. I think he's a lower end third line center. I don't think he's bad, but I don't think he's actively good at enough components of the game to justify the $3 million price tag. I know last summer he took less money to sign with the Oilers than with a number of teams who had offered him, including Tampa Bay, who had tried to recruit him to join their operation down there. And I think more likely than not, if Adam Henrique makes it through next season, by the time the playoffs come around, there's a good chance he's the fourth line center. And $3 million for a fourth line center who kills penalties and is maybe a 20 to 30 point guy, that's too rich for my blood. That's not a good cost efficiency. And I don't think they're going to trade Adam Henrique, but it's not out of the realm of the possibility that they would consider it to create more space. Same deal with Arvidsson. I think Arvidsson is almost certainly going to get moved to a team where he'll get more opportunity. I think Arvidsson's a great candidate for a team like Utah or Columbus or Chicago, a team that needs veterans who are functional hockey players who are going to let them play probably 2 minutes more per game than they're worth production-wise, just because they need to fill out their lineups. And for someone like Arvidsson, who's at a point in his career where he's made a lot of money, he's been competitive, you can tell he wants to play an important and a functional part of a good team. And I don't know if he's ever going to get to where Chris Knoblauch needs him or wants him to be that, because in a vacuum, I thought he was fine for most of the regular season playing with Draisaitl and Podkolzin or playing with McDavid in spurts there. But if there's not a fit, if Knoblauch doesn't see a world for Arvidsson to play in the top six, trade him. $4.5 million for a third line winger is too much. And he has, I think, a full no trade clause. I'm sorry about that. Words are hard. So his options as far as where the Oilers can send him are a little more limited, but the Oilers shouldn't be deterred here. If they think Arvidsson can be functional for them next year, by all means, if you have a vision, get him in there and see if he can execute it. But if not, don't be afraid. $4.5 million is a lot of money. And I know the cap's going to keep going up and these numbers are going to become higher and higher over the years, but you can't be burning $4.5 million on third liners that your coach doesn't fully trust. And speaking of guys Chris Knoblauch doesn't fully trust, coming up next in our following segment on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, we're going to break down who is an unrestricted free agent, the case for letting them go, the case for bringing them back, and a whole lot more on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. Are you looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein today with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily nutritional value. Plus, they're packed with that ultra important fiber for gut health and better for you unsaturated fats to help you keep feeling fuller for longer. Personally, I love the no-shell variety. It is the perfect grab-and-go snack for busy days. When I'm here at my desk, doing research, doing the show, or editing, or if it's the end of the day and I'm trying to hit my protein macros, they're a great go-to to fill in my nutritional gaps. Or if you're old school and you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. Wonderful Pistachios is a complete protein that provides all 9 essential amino acids. Get snacking and get cracking today with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers as we enter the week of the NHL draft, 2 weeks away from NHL free agency. And when you're a team that's close, and I've said this a lot over the last week and a half, so for my everydayers, you're going to hear me repeat myself. I'm sorry. Closing the gap between a very good team and a great team is the hardest thing to do in all of sports. Because you're not changing your core pieces, you're tinkering around the edges. And when you're only tinkering around the edges, the opportunities for material improvement are smaller. You know, the impact a third line left wing has on a game, they're not playing a lot of minutes. So they need to be better in those limited minutes. And that's really the challenge here. How can you evaluate a guy's production knowing you're going to need to play him in a very specific role? And that ties in very nicely to a lot of the guys we're about to talk about who are pending unrestricted free agents who could opt to leave. So number one, who's a candidate to return? Kasperi Kapanen, Trent Frederick, Connor Brown, Corey Perry, John Klingberg. So starting with Kapanen, very clear Chris Knobloch likes him. That's a guy who for much of the last handful of seasons was very adrift in his NHL career, didn't really play a lot of great hockey, and he wasn't an incredible Oiler by any stretch, but for what he would cost, and for Chris Knobloch's comfort level with him, I definitely see a world where Kapanen comes back. My hope would be he would be playing a lot more fourth line minutes as opposed to top 6 minutes. I think should the Oilers find a way to improve their top 6, I think that would naturally induce a trickle-down effect where everybody would slide down a spot. I think should Evander Kane be traded, which it does seem like is within reason, you're going to need to find a top 6 left wing somewhere out there in the ether. And obviously it's not going to be Jeff Skinner, who we're going to talk about in a minute. But I think Kapanen is a candidate to come back. It has been widely reported that the Oilers are close to a deal with Trent Frederick for a lot of term and a kind of costly cap hit for someone who doesn't put up a lot of stats. And look, I'll be fair to Trent Frederick. He was hurt in the playoffs. He was in the right spot quite often around the net front. He had scoring opportunities, but he just didn't have the timing down. He never really looked all of that comfortable in these playoffs. I am very reticent to give depth guys long-term contracts because they don't age particularly well physically, which always trickles down to impacting the way their cap hit works and the way their contract feels. You know, if Trent Frederick's making Corey Perry money, sure, whatever. But for $4 million, and again, I know the cap's going to go up, so $4 million is going to be the new $2.5 million real soon. But at the same time, just because you have money doesn't mean you need to spend it. And nothing about Trent Frederick's NHL career so far screams essential to championships. You know, he's a decent forechecker. He'll throw the gloves every now and then, but nothing about him is remarkable. He's okay. I don't think he's bad by any measure, but there's nothing about him that's screaming, I got to have him, I got to have him, I got to have him. I just think the Oilers are talking themselves into a player that they like. You know, Stan Bowman, I see why he likes Trent Frederick. He's tall, he skates pretty well, he likes to be physical, he can fight, and he does have a little bit of puck skill in his game, but it just not to the degree where I need him for 8 years. I don't think there's anyone other than that upper crust of guys you want for that long. And yes, I understand going longer on the contract allows you to offer a lower overall cap hit but keep it lower year-to-year cap hit to keep the overall money down. But at the same time, wouldn't you rather just pay the extra $1 million or so for 2 or 3 years and then reassess this down the road? Because then you're going to need to get rid of a bad contract. And look, I don't want to be unfair. I know Trent Frederic was dealing with a pretty serious ankle injury that limited his mobility, that limited his agility. I think with a full offseason and training camp, he can absolutely have a positive impact on a good team. But I think he's a third liner. I think he's a fourth liner. I think on a good team, he's probably tweening between those two lines. And that's not the type of guy you give $4 million a year to. And maybe I'm being a little harsh on him. You know, this is someone who was drafted pretty highly by the Bruins, never really seized the reins there, had opportunities when the Bruins were kind of floundering at various points, dealing with injuries, what have you. But they still ended up going out and getting guys like a Garnet Hathaway and a Tyler Bertuzzi for trying to augment their roster, make their team better. But at the same time, we sit here and you have to project a little bit. You have to make an educated guess. And right now, I wouldn't want to bring Trent Frederic back at that number. Again, if he wants to do 1 year, prove it. By all means, prove it. 1 year, 2 years, give him an Arvidsson deal. Give him 2x4. Give him 2x4.5. And if 2 years from now we still like Trent Frederic, then we can talk about going a little bit longer. But more likely than not, you're going to get 2 okay years out of those 8. And the final 6 are going to stink. And that's not something you can afford if you are a Stanley Cup contender. Connor Brown, I expect to be back. Chris Knobloch very much likes him, very much trusts him, plays an important role on the penalty kill, has the connection to both McDavid and Knobloch from junior hockey, and someone who has occasionally moonlighted in the top 6. Pretty good straight line speed, okay hands, someone that definitely has a role on a good team. I think at even strength, he's a third or fourth line tweener. I think he's very specialized and he's great in a straight line. He's a great penalty. I would say good penalty killer, not great. But that's a useful archetype. And for $1 million to $2 million for 1 more year, 2 more years, that's perfectly workable for what he brings to the table. Corey Perry, if they want to bring him back, keep doing the 1-and-1s by all means. He had 19 regular season goals. He had 10 in the playoffs. He was their Zach Hyman replacement. Chris Knobloch trusts him. McDavid and Draisaitl trust him a lot. I think the argument for bringing Perry back is perfectly reasonable. I don't think he'll be particularly expensive. He was a little more pricey than I would have liked this past year, probably like $300,000-$400,000 more than I would have given him, but he overperformed his contract, so he's entitled to continue to adjust for inflation with the numbers he earns as he goes along. And then last one, John Klingberg, which we'll tie up the second segment with. I think if there's a world where they can convince Klingberg to take like the Nate Schmidt deal or the Oliver Ekman-Larsson to Florida deal, the 1 or 2 year deal at $2 million, yes. Anything more than that, no. I think Klingberg, the mobility, it looked decent in the playoffs, but you saw him struggle against Florida, and I thought Klingberg was having a really good playoffs up until the Stanley Cup final. I thought him and Wallman were an excellent depth pair that played very sheltered minutes, but thrived in those sheltered minutes. So it made it worth it for Edmonton to really protect them in terms of quality of competition and zone starts. So with guys like Troy Stecher lingering around as cheaper replacements, I definitely think Klingberg could walk to a better team with a bit more of a solidified role, maybe earn a little more money if that's what he's in the pursuit of. But I would be very much welcome to Klingberg returning. If you wanted to roll with Ekholm, Bouchard, Nurse and Wallman, or Nurse and Kulak, and then Klingberg and Wallman, or there are enough permutations where Jake Wallman and John Klingberg wouldn't overlap with each other to a point of redundancy. The Oilers need puck-moving defensemen. Moving away from the Klingberg and Bouchard and Wallman types to chase grit or size would be a foolhardy endeavor, and I do think there's a world where it would make a lot of sense to bring John Klingberg back. Coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, we're going to talk about the elephants in the room. Connor McDavid's extension, Evan Bouchard's extension. Oh, yeah. What should the Oilers do with their goaltending? Coming up next on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're talking about baseball under the lights, golf under the green, or high-stakes soccer, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. If you're already following the action, why not make it a little more thrilling and getting in on the fun? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburnt at the beach. Whenever I go to a game, especially baseball, I love to get in on the fun. Things like the over always exciting because then you get to root for both teams to score. If you want to get a little dicey, things like no run first inning, where both teams need to get through the first clean without giving up a run. There are so many ways to make games more exciting. And if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if that first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit fanduel.com/lockedon to get started. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers, the week of the NHL draft. And as we sit here, it is important to do my quick news literacy spiel. You are going to see a preposterous amount of information over the next 2 weeks. It is important to understand how sourced reporting works. So number one, most of the time when a reporter writes something, tweets something, says something on a show, they are going on sourced material. They have spoken to people directly or tangentially involved in a situation, and that person, the source, is giving a specific version of events. And a good example of this is how even when teams like the Rangers, the Leafs, the Lightning, the Panthers, they don't have cap space, or Vegas or Dallas or Colorado or Winnipeg, whatever team you want to pick that has not a lot of cap space, they get tied to a really good player. They all get tied to Mitch Marner, even though none of these teams I just mentioned have a ton of cap space. And teams do that, reporters do that because the agent or the executive is trying to do something. They're trying to drive the price up. They're trying to drive the price down. They're trying to manipulate the wind, the way it's blowing. And it gives you a false sense of the market. And sometimes that works. Sometimes it doesn't. And with that in mind, there is going to be no bigger story in hockey than the McDavid extension, negotiations, and agreement. Because this is the best player in the world. He's 28 years old. He's coming off of 2 straight Stanley Cup final losses. People who are not involved in this situation at all, like Steve Levy of ESPN, who does not break news, who sure has friends in hockey, saying things like, I could see a world where the Oilers trade McDavid because they don't want to lose him for nothing next year. Entirely unsourced, wholly speculation. That is going to be the nature of our reality, unfortunately, until McDavid agrees to an extension. Once the extension is agreed to, conversation changes. I have no qualms about giving McDavid the full 20% of the salary cap ceiling max you can give an NHL player. He is the best player in the world. He is unequivocally worth it. A down year for him is 100 points. This is the best hockey player I have ever seen. There is no bundle of assets you could get in return for Connor McDavid that would make me feel good about it. Even if you got a truly great player in return, even if you got Sasha Barkov, even if you got Austin Matthews or Nathan McKinnon, I still wouldn't feel very good for it. I really would not feel very good about it. And frankly, the Oilers need to find a way to get this done as soon as possible, purely for planning. Because once you know the McDavid number, then you can pivot to addressing Evan Bouchard, because those two are hand in hand. And I do think one is going to impact the other, because over the next year or two, I suppose I'm going to guess that we are going to see NHL contracts change, especially for those high-end players. Generally speaking, those superstars, the McDavids, the Draisaitls, the Tkachuk, Barkov, whatever great player you're thinking of, they come off that entry-level contract at 21 or 22. They sign a 7 or 8 year deal that gets them to unrestricted free agency. They get one chance to cash out at 28, 29, or 30. They sign one big contract in free agency. It usually goes bad, and that player bounces around a few spots on prove-it deals till they retire. I think it would make a lot more sense for the McDavids, the Mitch Marners of the world. Look for a 3 or a 4 year deal. Go for 3 years at 20% of the cap. And then 3 years from now, when the cap is $20 million, $30 million higher, do it again. And get a contract at 28, 31, 34. And each time, yes, you're taking risk. Hockey is a violent physical sport. And the consensus always was take the long-term deal, get the financial security, and square things away. Now that the NHL is going to be operating in a growth period where revenues are going to go up, player salaries are going to go up in alignment with that. You as a player, if money is your top priority, you have the capacity to keep resetting what you're worth every 3 or 4 years. Austin Matthews did this. He signed the 4-year deal with the Leafs on the supposition that this cap was going to go up and go up explosively in the short term. Now we know it's coming. Now we know we're probably 3 or 4 years away from a $120 million cap ceiling. If the cap is $120 million, what $15 million against that is versus what it is against $92.5 million, those are very different economic realities. And yeah, I said in the first segment, it might be crazy that they're going to pay Draisaitl, McDavid, and Evan Bouchard north of $40 million for 3 guys. But that's not going to be half of the salary cap anymore. That's not going to be what it was when the Leafs had Marner, Nylander, Tavares, and Matthews all on the same team making half of the cap. The Oilers are going to be in a position to capitalize on the fact the cap's going to keep going up. And the other area where the cap is an interesting conversation in regards to the Oilers is the goaltender position. And throughout the year, I was pretty adamant that, yeah, Skinner and Pickard probably not good enough to win a Stanley Cup. But for what you're paying them and what they give you, it's fine. For the regular season, most of the time, that .895 league average goaltending, it's enough. It's fine most nights. Again, if your goal is just to make the playoffs, be competitive, things break right, your best players win the games for you, great. All that stuff works to a degree. But in the Stanley Cup final, and look, again, I said this a ton last week, I don't think Pickard and Skinner are the reason the Oilers lost. They didn't help, but even a great goalie in that series, the Oilers didn't score enough. The Oilers fundamentally did not score enough. So if you're a guy out there or girl listening out there who wants, John Gibson or Karel Vejmelka or Vitek Vanacek or whatever project goalie, Akira Schmidt, if you're talking yourself into one of those unproven goalies to go into a tandem with Pickard and Skinner, fine. That's cost reasonable. I don't think there's a world where the Oilers are going to take John Gibson's full $6 million because the Oilers already need to shed salary. That's why I think there's a world where they get rid of both Kane and Arvidsson. And with that $9 million in space, they figure out what they're going to do with Evan Bouchard. And then they still need 2 new forwards, but Evan Bouchard's making twice as much money as he was making on his previous deal. So there are a lot of moving parts to keep track of, and this is going to be a real challenge. And we know from the end of his tenure in Chicago, Stan Bowman's not great at this. Stan Bowman is not great at pricing guys at a reasonable number and managing the cap. He very famously got himself in trouble overpaying for certain guys and overpaying in trades for certain guys because they were his guys. And over time, they started to bleed assets. They ran out of cap space. And then you had to go into an eventual teardown. And the Blackhawks are still probably at least a year, if not 2 away from being a serious contender again. So it's really important that Stan Bowman does learn from his cap management problems of the past. But with all of that said, that will do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please give the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, like the video, leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. Who would you like to bring back? Who would you like to get rid of? If you leave a good comment, I'll read it on tomorrow's show. I will talk to you guys then. And until then, let's go Oilers.